Was there ever a time when the world forgot itself? Picture this. The year is 476 AD, and the once mighty Roman Empire crumbles like a house of cards under a storm. The marble columns of Rome, bathed in the golden glow of a fading sun, stand silent as the last emperor. A boy named Romulus Augustulus is quietly swept from power. The world, it seems, holds its breath. What follows, they say, is a shadow that falls over Europe, a time we call the Dark Ages, an era shrouded in mystery, where knowledge vanished and ignorance reigned. Or did it? Was this truly a time of darkness, or was it something else entirely? A carefully woven veil, hiding truths too dangerous to be told? Welcome to the Sacred Chronicle, where we unravel the threads of history to find the light of God's truth. Tonight, we'll step into a story that might just change how you see the past. Subscribe to the channel, and I'll ask God to bring all the good things into your life. Let's begin with a man named Brother Elias, a humble monk in a forgotten corner of Europe, his quills scratching against parchment in the flickering light of a single candle. His story is about to surprise you. Elias lived in a world where empires had fallen, and the echoes of Rome's grandeur were little more than whispers on the wind. The Mediterranean breeze, once carrying the scent of spices and the hum of trade, now carried only the weight of silence. Cities that had buzzed with philosophers, poets, and architects now lay in ruins, their streets choked with dust. The great libraries of Alexandria and Rome, repositories of human wisdom, were either ash or locked away, their secrets guarded by those who claimed to serve God. But Elias, with his ink-stained fingers and weary eyes, sensed something was amiss. He had heard tales, whispers among the monks, of manuscripts destroyed, of histories rewritten, of truths buried beneath layers of dogma. The church, rising from the ashes of Rome, had become the sole keeper of knowledge, its monasteries dotting the landscape like beacons in a sea of shadows. But what were they keeping? And what were they hiding? Imagine a world where the written word was a treasure rarer than gold. In the early centuries after Rome's fall, Europe seemed to retreat into itself. The grand aqueducts stopped flowing, the roads that once connected empires crumbled underfoot, and the art of writing became a privilege of few. The church, with its towering cathedrals and solemn chants, stood as the guardian of what remained. Monks like Elias toiled in scriptoriums, copying ancient texts by hand, their breath visible in the cold stone rooms. They preserved the words of Aristotle, Plato, and the Gospels, but only in Latin, a language the common folk could no longer understand. Knowledge, once shared freely in bustling forums, was now locked behind monastery walls, accessible only to those deemed worthy by the church. Was this a time of ignorance, as we're told, or was it a time of control, where the church decided what the world could know? Picture Elias, hunched over his desk, his eyes straining to decipher a faded scroll. The parchment, brittle with age, spoke of things that didn't align with the church's teachings. Stories of a world beyond Europe, of civilizations that thrived while Europe slept. He had heard rumors of the East, where Islamic scholars preserved the works of Greeks, where Chinese philosophers penned treatises under starlit skies. Yet in his village, the people were told the world was flat, that the stars were fixed, that questioning was a sin. Elias felt a stirring in his soul, a whisper from God, urging him to seek the truth. But the truth was dangerous. The church, with its vast reach, held sway over kings and peasants alike. To question its narrative was to risk everything: exile, imprisonment, or worse. As Elias worked, he began to notice gaps in the stories he copied, dates that didn't add up, events that seemed too neatly aligned, manuscripts that ended abruptly as if someone had torn out the final pages. The fall of Rome, he was told, marked the beginning of a dark age, a time when humanity stumbled blindly. Its progress halted. But the more he read, the more he wondered, was this darkness real, or was it a story crafted to keep the world in check? The church taught that God's plan was unfolding, that the trials of this age were a test of faith. Yet Elias couldn't shake the feeling that something was being hidden, not just from him, but from all of humanity. What if the Dark Ages weren't a time of loss, but a time of concealment? What if the silence in the historical record wasn't an accident, but a design? The mystery deepened as Elias stumbled upon a forbidden text. hidden beneath a loose stone in the monastery cellar. Its pages spoke of a time before the Dark Ages, a time when knowledge flowed like rivers, when men and women questioned the stars and built machines that rivaled the wonders of Rome. But this text was incomplete, its edges charred as if someone had tried to destroy it. Elias's heart raced as he read, his candle burning low. Who had hidden this manuscript? And why? The church claimed to be the light in the darkness, the preserver of God's word. But what if it was also the gatekeeper of secrets, deciding which truths could see the light of day? As Elias tucked the manuscript back into its hiding place, he made a silent vow. He would uncover the truth, no matter the cost. This was the world of the Dark Ages, a world of shadows, where knowledge was both a treasure and a threat. The fall of Rome had left a void, and the church had filled it, becoming the arbiter of what was true, what was holy, what was allowed. But men like Elias, driven by faith and curiosity, began to question the narrative. They sensed that history was not just a record of what had happened, but a story shaped by those in power. As the candlelight flickered in Elias's cell, casting shadows on the stone walls, he felt the weight of a mystery that would echo through the centuries. Was the Dark Ages truly a time of ignorance, or was it the greatest cover-up in history? The answers, he knew, were out there waiting to be found. The scent of damp stone and melted wax filled the air as Brother Elias knelt in the scriptorium, his fingers tracing the worn edges of parchment. Outside, the wind howled across the rugged hills, rattling the monastery's wooden shutters. It was a cold night, the kind that made the world feel small, huddled around a faint glow of a single candle. Elias's eyes, tired from hours of copying texts, lingered on the words before him. Latin, the language of the church, a tongue that locked away secrets from those who toiled in the fields beyond these walls. The church, they said, was the light of God in a darkened world, the keeper of wisdom after Rome's fall. But as Elias worked, a question burned in his heart. If the church was preserving knowledge, why did so much of it feel hidden? Why did the truth seem to slip through his fingers like sand? In the centuries after 476 AD, Europe was a patchwork of scattered villages and crumbling ruins. The grand forums of Rome, where philosophers once debated under open skies, were now overgrown with weeds, their marble cracked by time. The church had risen as a new power, its cathedrals piercing the heavens, its bells calling the faithful to prayer. But with that power came control over what could be read, what could be known, what could be believed. Ancient texts, the works of poets, mathematicians, and astronomers, were gathered into monasteries like this one, where monks like Elias labored to preserve them. Yet not all texts were saved. Some were burned, their ashes scattered to the wind. Others were rewritten, their words reshaped to fit the church's vision of the world. Elias had seen it himself. A scroll, half destroyed, its heretical ideas scratched out by a zealous hand. What truths had been lost in those flames? What stories had been silenced? Picture the scene. A monastery perched on a lonely hill, its walls guarding a library of secrets. Inside, monks bent over their desks, their quills scratching in unison, copying the Bible, the lives of saints, the approved histories. But these were not the only texts. Hidden in locked chests or buried beneath floorboards were manuscripts the church deemed dangerous, philosophies that questioned divine order, sciences that challenged the stars, histories that spoke of a world before the church's reign. Elias had heard whispers of such texts, passed from monk to monk in hushed tones. One night, an older brother, his face lined with years of silence, had told him of a library in Alexandria, once the greatest in the world, now reduced to legend. They say it burned, the old monk whispered, but some say the church took its secrets, hiding them where no one could find them. Elias's pulse quickened. Was it true? Had the church not only preserved knowledge, but also buried it? The world outside the monastery was a place of toil and fear. Peasants worked the land, their lives governed by the seasons and the church's decrees. They were told the world was flat, that the heavens were a dome fixed above, that to question was to defy God. Yet across the sea, in distant lands, other civilizations flourished. In the Islamic world, scholars in Baghdad's House of Wisdom translated Greek texts, studied the stars, and wrote treatises on mathematics that would one day change the world. In China, the Tang dynasty built cities of dazzling splendor, their poets and engineers weaving a tapestry of progress. Elias had read fragments of these stories, smuggled into the monastery by travelers or traders. Why, he wondered, was Europe so different? Why was his world cloaked in ignorance, while others shone with light? The church taught that this was God's will, that the Dark Ages were a time of trial. But Elias couldn't help but wonder, was it God's will or the church's design? One evening, as the monastery fell silent, Elias slipped into the cellar, his heart pounding. He had found a hidden manuscript again, the one tucked beneath the loose stone. Its pages were fragile, the ink faded, but the words spoke of a time when knowledge was free, when men built machines to measure the stars and ships to cross vast oceans. These were not the words of heretics, but of seekers, men and women who, like Elias, yearned for truth, yet the church had declared such ideas forbidden. Why? Elias thought of the burnings he'd heard of, books deemed too dangerous, piled high in courtyards and set ablaze as priests chanted prayers. He thought of the scribes who rewrote histories, erasing names and events that didn't fit the church's narrative. Knowledge, he realized, was power, and the church held it tightly, doling it out in fragments to those it deemed worthy. The Latin of the church was a barrier, a wall between the people and the past. Only the clergy could read it, and only they could interpret God's word. Elias remembered the village priest, his voice booming from the pulpit, warning of the dangers of curiosity. Trust in the church, he'd said, for it alone knows the path to salvation. But Elias felt a stirring in his soul, a whisper from God that urged him to question. He thought of the apostles, men who walked with Jesus, who asked and sought and doubted. Wasn't faith stronger when tested? Wasn't truth worth seeking, even if it lay hidden in the shadows? The church claimed to be the guardian of God's light. But what if it was also the keeper of secrets, deciding which truths could be told? As Elias returned the manuscript to its hiding place, he felt the weight of his discovery. The Dark Ages, he realized, were not just a time of loss, but a time of control. The church had built a world where knowledge was a privilege, not a right, where the past was shaped to serve the present. Yet there were cracks in that world, whispers of other civilizations, fragments of forbidden texts, men like Elias who dared to ask why. The candle in itself flickered, casting long shadows on the walls, and Elias made a silent prayer. He asked God for courage, for wisdom, for the strength to uncover the truth. The church was powerful, its reach vast, but Elias believed that God's truth was greater still. Somewhere in the silence of the Dark Ages, that truth was waiting to be found. The moon hung low over the monastery, its pale light filtering through the narrow window of Brother Elias's cell, casting ethereal shadows on the stone floor. He sat there, wrapped in his coarse woolen robe, the chill of the night seeping into his bones. In his hand was a tattered map, its edges frayed, its ink faded from years hidden away. Elias had found it tucked inside an old codex, a relic from a time that felt both distant and strangely close. As he studied the lines, coasts that twisted in unfamiliar ways, stars charted with impossible precision, he felt a shiver run down his spine. What if the history he knew was not just incomplete, but invented? What if the Dark Ages had not just knowledge, but time itself? The idea gnawed at him like a persistent dream, blurring the line between reality and illusion. In the quiet hours before dawn, Elias pondered the whispers he'd heard from traveling scholars. Tales of a phantom time, a gap in historical record where centuries seemed to vanish. They spoke of the years between 614 and 911 AD, a period of about 300 years that some claim never existed, fabricated by emperors and popes to align calendars and consolidate power. Elias traced his finger over the map, wondering if this was possible. The church's chronicles told of kings and battles, of saints and miracles, but what if those stories were woven from thin air? The Holy Roman Emperor Otto III, they said, conspired with Pope Sylvester II to invent these years, shifting the calendar to make the year 1000 AD coincide with a millennial celebration. Elias's mind reeled. If true, it meant the Dark Ages weren't just dark. They were a mirage, a constructed void to control the narrative of faith and empire. Imagine Elias unrolling the map under the flickering candlelight, his breath catching as he recognized anomalies that defied explanation. This was no ordinary chart. It resembled the Pyre Reese map, a mysterious artifact said to depict the coast of Antarctica long before its discovery, ice-free and detailed with eerie accuracy. How could sailors from the early 16th century know such things? Elias had read fragments about it in forbidden texts. How the map drew from older sources, perhaps from the time of Alexander the Great, or even earlier civilizations. But if the Dark Ages were a time of ignorance, how did such knowledge survive? Or was it evidence of hidden archives, preserved through the phantom years? The map showed continents aligned in ways that matched modern astronomy, yet it predated telescopes and global voyages. Elias felt a surge of wonder mixed with fear. What other maps lay hidden, their secrets buried to maintain the illusion of a lost age? As the night deepened, Elias turned to the stars, stepping out into the monastery's courtyard where the skies stretched like a vast velvet canopy. He recalled the astronomical contradictions that plagued the historical record. Eclipses recorded in ancient annals that didn't align with modern calculations. For instance, the solar eclipse of 968 AD, mentioned in Chronicles, seemed off by days when traced back through celestial mechanics. If 300 years were added falsely, these discrepancies vanished, the stars falling into place like pieces of a divine puzzle. Elias gazed upward, the constellations wheeling overhead, and whispered a prayer for clarity. God had set the heavens in motion, a clockwork of perfection. Yet human history clashed with that order. Was it error or deliberate deception? The Church's calendars, reformed under Gregory the 13th centuries later, hinted at earlier manipulations, gaps filled with invented saints and spurious events. Elias's thoughts drifted to the archaeological artifacts that whispered of hidden truths, objects unearthed from the earth that didn't fit the timeline. He had heard of Carolingian coins bearing dates that overlapped impossibly with Byzantine relics, of buildings like the Aachen Cathedral, attributed to Charlemagne in 800 AD, yet showing architectural styles that echoed much earlier Roman designs without the expected evolution. What if Charlemagne's empire was a fiction, a bridge over phantom time? Elias imagined digging through the soil, unearthing a sword hilt engraved with runes that predated the Vikings, or a stone tablet inscribed with laws that mirrored those of forgotten kings. These artifacts, scattered across Europe, challenged the narrative of a dark, stagnant age. Instead, they suggested continuity, a thread of knowledge unbroken but concealed, perhaps by the very monks who copied texts in silence. One stormy evening, as rain lashed the monastery walls, Elias shared his doubts with a fellow brother, a wizened scribe named Anselm. They huddled in the library, surrounded by shelves groaning under the weight of parchments. Anselm spoke in low tones of the Dendermonde Codex, a manuscript with illuminations that depicted technologies and hourglass spectacles, appearing centuries before their supposed invention. If time is as we know it, Anselm murmured, these are anomalies. But if years were forged, his voice trailed off, the implication hanging in the air like smoke. Elias nodded, his mind racing. The Pyre Reese map wasn't alone. There were others, like the Vinland map, showing Norse explorations that blurred the lines of discovery. And then the astronomical clocks, like the Antikythera mechanism from ancient Greece, a geared wonder that computed planetary positions with precision lost until the Renaissance. How did such ingenuity vanish, only to reappear as if no time had passed? The phantom time hypothesis wove through Elias's dreams, a tapestry of missing years where history was edited like a flawed manuscript. He envisioned scribes in imperial courts, under Otto's command, inserting chronicles of fictitious popes and battles to legitimize rule. The Church, complicit or unaware, perpetuated the tale, its doctrines intertwined with the altered timeline. Elias felt profound unease, yet also a spark of hope. If time could be hidden, so could truths about God's creation, about the world's wonders. He prayed for guidance, asking the Lord to reveal what man had concealed. The evidence was there, in maps that charted unknown lands, in stars that refused to lie, in artifacts that spoke of a continuum rather than a break. As Elias extinguished his candle, the darkness enveloped him, but his mind burned with questions. The Dark Ages, with their phantom shadows, seemed less a void and more a veil, drawn to obscure the light. Men like him, seekers in the night, would pull at its edges, unraveling the mystery one thread at a time. The truth, he believed, was eternal, waiting beyond the illusion. The fog rolled in from the valley below, wrapping the monastery in a shroud of mist, as if the very earth conspired to keep its secrets. Brother Elias paced the cloistered walkway, his sandals whispering against the cold flagstones, his mind a whirlwind of doubts and discoveries. The phantom years haunted him, their ghostly presence lingering in every mismatched date and unexplained relic. But now, a new shadow fell across his path. The shadow of silence, enforced by those who claimed to speak for God. Elias had begun to see the patterns. Text vanishing not by accident, but by design, voices stifled not by ignorance, but by fear. In the heart of the Dark Ages, suppression was an art, practiced in the name of faith, and from its ashes rose societies sworn to protect what the church sought to bury. Elias remembered the day a traveler arrived at the monastery gates, his cloak tattered from long roads, his eyes darting like a hunted animal. The man spoke in hushed tones of the Inquisition, a force born in the 12th century, but with roots stretching back into the shadows of earlier times. It began as a whisper, a papal decree to root out heresy, but grew into a machine of terror, its inquisitors wielding fire and iron to silence dissent. Elias imagined the scenes, dimly lit chambers where accused souls confess under duress, their words twisted to fit the church's narrative. Books deemed dangerous, works on alchemy, astronomy, or ancient philosophies, were consigned to flames, their knowledge turned to smoke that blotted out the stars. The traveler had seen himself, a pyre in a town square, parchments crackling as priests intoned prayers, ensuring that only approved truth survived. Elias felt a chill. Was this protection or erasure? In the quiet of his cell, Elias pored over a salvaged fragment, its edges singed from a close escape. It spoke of censorship not as sporadic acts, but as a systematic veil drawn over Europe. The church, fearing the chaos of free thought, controlled the scriptoriums, dictating what could be copied and what must be destroyed. Monastic orders, like the Benedictines and Cistercians, became both preservers and censors. They collected manuscripts from crumbling libraries, hauling them to fortified abbeys where they were scrutinized. Some were hidden in secret vaults, accessible only to the initiated. Texts on the Kabbalah, Greek mysteries, or Eastern wisdom that challenged doctrinal purity. Elias envisioned these orders as guardians of a double-edged sword, outwardly pious, inwardly custodians of forbidden lore. A brother had once confided in him about a hidden library beneath Mont Saint-Michel, its shelves groaning with volumes the world believed lost. But access came at a price, vows of silence, oaths that bound the soul. As weeks turned to months, Elias's quest led him deeper into the web of secrecy. He heard tales of societies emerging from fringes, groups that preserved what the Inquisition sought to extinguish. The alchemists were first, cloaked in symbols and riddles, their laboratories hidden in forest clearings or castle basements. They transmuted not just metals, but knowledge, encoding ancient wisdom in diagrams of philosopher's stone, where lead became gold and ignorance enlightenment. Elias dreamed of them, figures bent over bubbling retorts, their faces illuminated by eerie glows, whispering formulas that echoed hermetic texts smuggled from Alexandria. Then came the Rosicrucians, shrouded in myth, their manifestos appearing like ghosts in the early 17th century, but rooted in medieval mysticism. They promised a brotherhood of the Rosy Cross, guardians of esoteric truths, blending Christianity with pagan lore to form a hidden path to God. But it was the Freemasons that stirred Elias's imagination most profoundly. Born from stonemasons' guilds in the late Middle Ages, they evolved into a network of lodges, their rituals veiled in symbolism, compasses and squares representing moral geometry, the all-seeing eye watching over secrets. Elias had encountered a mason once, a builder repairing the monastery's walls, who spoke in coded phrases of a great architect of the universe. These societies, he learned, collected the fragments the church discarded, maps of lost continents, astronomical charts defying flat earth dogmas, histories of civilizations predating Noah's flood. They met in hidden chambers, under oaths of secrecy, preserving knowledge through oral traditions and encrypted writings. Elias wondered if his own monastery harbored such a cell. Perhaps the abbot himself was initiated, his stern gaze hiding a deeper allegiance. One fateful night, as thunder rumbled distant warnings, Elias discovered a symbol etched into the cellar wall, a compass intertwined with a rose. His heart raced. This was no mere graffiti, but a marker for the initiated. He traced it with trembling fingers, feeling the pull of a world beyond the church's grasp. The suppression had birthed these societies, forcing wisdom underground like roots, seeking water in parched soil. The Inquisition's fires had illuminated the need for shadows, where truth could flourish unseen. Elias prayed then, not for forgiveness, but for strength to join this silent resistance. God, he believed, delighted in seekers, in those who questioned a firm faith. The Dark Ages' silence was deafening, but beneath it hummed a chorus of hidden voices, waiting for the right ear to listen. Elias closed his eyes, the mist outside thickening, and let the stories wash over him. The monastic orders had hidden manuscripts in caves and catacombs, their locations passed down through generations. Secret societies wove networks across Europe, from Scotland's misty highlands to Italy's sun-baked hills, smuggling knowledge like precious cargo. Alchemists encoded their findings in art, Rosicrucians in pamphlets that vanished as quickly as they appeared, Freemasons in architecture that spoke to those who knew the language. This was the true legacy of suppression, not oblivion, but resilience. Knowledge, like faith, cannot be extinguished. It merely transformed, biding its time in the shadows. The first rays of dawn pierced the mist, gilding the monastery spires with a soft, golden light, as if the world itself was awakening from a long slumber. Brother Elias stood at the window of his cell, watching the sun climb over the hills, its warmth chasing away the shadows of the night. For years, he had delved into the mysteries of the Dark Ages, the phantom times, the suppressed knowledge, the secret societies that guarded forbidden truths. Now, as whispers of change stirred across Europe, Elias sensed a shift, a stirring that promised light after centuries of obscurity. But was this awakening genuine, a divine renaissance of the human spirit, or merely another layer of control, a selective unveiling orchestrated by the very powers that had hidden the truth? The Renaissance, they called it, a rebirth. But Elias wondered if it was truly a new dawn or a carefully managed illusion. In the late 14th century, as the Black Death receded and trade routes reopened, Europe began to stir. Artists like Leonardo da Vinci's sketch machines that echoed ancient designs, their notebooks filled with ideas that seemed plucked from lost manuscripts. Scholars pored over Greek and Roman texts, suddenly rediscovered in monastery libraries or brought back from the East by crusaders. Elias imagined the scene. Florence's bustling streets, where painters captured the human form with lifelike precision, architects raised domes that rival Rome's Pantheon, and philosophers debated humanism under frescoed ceilings. It was a burst of creativity, a flowering of knowledge that pulled Europe from the so-called darkness. Yet Elias, with his cache of hidden scrolls, saw the threads connecting back to the suppressed past. These ideas weren't new. They had been preserved, guarded by monastic orders and secret societies, released only when the time was deemed right. Picture Elias leafing through a newly arrived codex, its pages alive with illustrations of anatomy and astronomy. The Vatican, the heart of the Church, played a pivotal role in this renaissance. Popes like Nicholas V founded libraries, collecting thousands of manuscripts, while others patronized artists who wove biblical themes with classical motifs. But was this benevolence or strategy? Elias had learned of the Vatican's vast archives, vaults rumored to hold texts that contradicted official history, account of earlier explorations, scientific treatises predating Galileo, timelines that blurred the Dark Ages into something far less dark. The Church shaped the narrative, deciding which ancient works to translate, which to herald as rediscoveries. The Renaissance wasn't a spontaneous awakening. It was a controlled release, knowledge drip-fed to align with ecclesiastical power, ensuring that progress served faith rather than challenged it. As Elias wandered the monastery gardens, the scent of blooming roses filling the air, he reflected on the Vatican's influence over collective memory. History, he realized, was not a fixed river but a sculpted garden, pruned and directed by those in authority. The Church's scholars rewrote timelines, attributing inventions to Renaissance figures, while burying their medieval precursors. For instance, the printing press of Gutenberg revolutionized the spread of ideas, but movable type had echoes in earlier Chinese innovations, fragments of which had been hidden in European monasteries. Elias thought of maps emerging during this era, detailed charts of the New World that hinted at pre-Columbian voyages, perhaps known to secret societies long before Columbus set sail. The Vatican approved explorations, blessing fleets that expanded Christendom. But what of maps they suppressed, those that suggested older, non-Christian discoveries? The role of the Vatican extended to art and science, where genius was celebrated but bounded. Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel ceiling depicted biblical scenes with anatomical accuracy drawn from dissected cadavers, a practice once forbidden but now tolerated under papal patronage. Yet dissections were monitored, knowledge curated to avoid heresy. Elias envisioned the Council of Trent, where the Church reformed itself in response to the Protestant Reformation, tightening control over doctrine while allowing artistic expression that reinforced Catholic grandeur. This was no uncontrolled rebirth. It was a renaissance on a leash, where hidden knowledge from the Dark Ages was unveiled selectively, ensuring the Church remained the arbiter of truth. Alchemists transitioned to chemists, Rosicrucians influenced philosophers, Freemasons embedded symbols in cathedrals, all under the watchful eye of Rome. One crisp autumn day, Elias received a visitor, a scholar from Rome, his robes embroidered with Vatican insignia. They walked the cloisters, discussing the flowering of arts and letters. The scholar spoke glowingly of humanism, of how ancient texts illuminated God's creation. But Elias pressed gently, mentioning anomalies, the Pyrie Reis map, astronomical discrepancies, artifacts that suggested a richer medieval world. The scholar's eyes narrowed, his voice dropping to a cautionary tone. "History is what we remember," he said, "and the Church guides that memory for the soul's salvation." Elias nodded, but inwardly he marveled at the admission. The Renaissance was a masterpiece of control, a stage awakening where suppressed wisdom was repackaged, its edges softened to fit the Church's frame. Collective memory was molded, timelines adjusted, ensuring the Dark Ages remained a cautionary tale of what happens without ecclesiastical guidance. In his final reflections, as winter chills settled over the monastery, Elias sat by the fire, his hidden manuscript spread before him. History, he concluded, is not only what happened, but what we are allowed to remember. The Dark Ages cover-up, with its phantom times and secret guardians, fed into the Renaissance, a period of light that cast long shadows. Yet in this, Elias found hope. God's truth endures, woven through even the most controlled narratives. Men like him, quiet seekers, ensured that sparks of genuine awakening flickered on. The Church's grip might shape the story, but divine curiosity would always pull at its seams. If Brother Elias' story has moved you or made you think, please share it. It could be just what someone else needs to hear. Brother Elias' life shows us that change is possible for everyone. If you enjoyed this content, be sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss our next videos, where we'll explore the stories of other biblical characters and the valuable lessons they teach us. Just as God transformed Brother Elias' life, he also has a plan for you. See you in the next video.